Good afternoon. I am very pleased to welcome a much very distinguished person, Ambassador to Poland, Ambassador of the United States to Poland, Mr. Lee Feinsteina. This is a great day for the university or for the Institute of International Relations. And when Mr. Ambassador asked us to organize this meeting, we immediately positively responded, because we want to create an extra opportunity for exchange of view, for starting the dialogue between the United States and the Institute of International Relations. And after short lecture, half an hour, delivered by Mr. Ambassador, there will be a time for question. Every question, easy and difficult. Every person will be entitled to ask one question in order to make an opportunity to ask people. So we have a 1.5 hour for a seminar. Only 1 hour. Okay. So please go ahead, Mr. Ambassador. Undoubtedly, I will not participate in the next part of this meeting because I have a tough teaching obligation. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Shall I just speak from here?
Of course.
Well, first of all, thank you very, very much, and your teaching responsibilities must come first, so I fully understand. And it's really great to be here and great to be at Warsaw University, which is so close to my office. And if my information is right, this is not only the university with the largest group of students studying international relations in Poland, but also the university with the largest number of foreign students studying international relations in Poland. And I'm also been very interested to learn that the largest number of students studying international relations are studying American studies. So that's very great. Actually, just to see how the acoustics is and to see whether people are awake. How many of you are studying American studies? Okay, well, very good. Well, it's really a pleasure. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank again Director Halijat for the invitation. And I also have to say that I owe him and the Institute a big debt, because several people who work at the U.S. Embassy are Warsaw University graduates. In fact, actually, you may be surprised to know that most of the people who work at the U.S. Embassy are Polish, not American. And not Polish-American, there are plenty of those too, but Polish-Polish. And many of them come from Warsaw University, and they have very, very fond memories. So I hope that one day a few of you may look back on this and remember when you were a student, and then perhaps it will encourage you to come work on Ujazdowski Street with us. So the talk today is billed as a talk about U.S. foreign policy and U.S. foreign policy as it relates to Central Europe and, of course, Poland. I look forward to talking about those issues and how our relations together impact global security and European security as well. And I do not plan to speak for half an hour. I'll speak less to leave more time, I hope, for questions and discussion between you and me. Well, I hope that in the busyness of your lives and in preparations for exams and figuring out where and what apartment you're going to live in, you are nonetheless able to take a step back and think about how incredible an opportunity you have to be studying international relations at this moment in time, and in particular as the events in North Africa and the Middle East are unfolding. It's truly an incredible time to be entering the world of international relations. And also, you're doing it in a country and in a part of the world which also has a very special role to play. Every situation, of course, is different, but Poland, because of its experience, and Poland, because of its success, really does have a unique contribution to make at this time of change. Everybody now is transfixed by what's happening in the Middle East and North Africa, and I thought I should start by saying a few things about that. First of all, Poland and the United States have been talking with each other, and Poland, the United States, and Europe have been working very closely together on assisting new governments to develop democratic institutions and practices in North Africa and the Middle East. And we've already taken a united stand in condemning Colonel Gaddafi and the violence he unleashed on his own people. One of our priorities early on as developments in North Africa have moved forward is to cooperate, to have the international community speak with one voice, as we did recently in passing a UN Security Council resolution condemning the actions of Colonel Gaddafi. We put a high priority on speaking together and sending the message that we're standing up for citizens of the region, just as we did before some of you were born, for the citizens of Central Europe. And as I said, Poland has a special role serving as a model for others to learn from. And indeed, long before the current events unfolded, we have seen, I have personally seen and even hosted at my house visitors from Afghanistan, visitors from Egypt and Jordan who have come to Poland to learn firsthand about the experience of solidarity activists and people in government now who may not have had direct experience in solidarity to draw on their experience. Polish-American relations are, of course, broad and deep, and they are forged over more than 2 centuries, and we've each taken turns in helping the other fight for one another's freedom. But today, Poland and the United States are working together on building a relationship for the 21st century. And we're concentrating our work in 3 essential areas: promoting democracy, expanding prosperity, and building our mutual security. And if you'll allow me, I'll just go through each of these pillars of our relationship briefly, and then look forward to a discussion together. First, democracy. The United States and Poland are adding structure and substance to our common efforts to promote democracy around the world. I was in Washington last week for the meeting between Minister Sikorski and Secretary Clinton, and they together announced the establishment of a democracy dialogue, which is part of our overall strategic dialogue between the 2 countries. And indeed, there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to do. First, in the Eastern neighborhood, Poland has been a leader in promoting democracy and stability and good governance in the Eastern neighborhood, and the United States strongly supports Poland's efforts and leadership. Poland, with Sweden, co-sponsored the Eastern Partnership Initiative, which is now an initiative that's been adopted and accepted and endorsed by the European Union. And we're very, very pleased about this. And the United States is also working very avidly on this part of the world, and we believe that establishing this new democracy dialogue between Poland and the United States will be an opportunity for us better to coordinate our respective policies, but also in a way maybe to give some additional impetus for the Eastern Partnership Initiative to really get underway. I just wanted to say a few things about the level of the American commitment. Last year, the United States allocated $310 million in assistance for countries that are in the Eastern Partnership area, plus the remainder of a $1 billion assistance package to Georgia. And just in the last period of time, we signed a 5-year plan with the government of Moldova worth $262 million on a variety of good government initiatives. So I'm very pleased to say that the United States is putting its money where its mouth is in terms of commitment to these countries. And as I said before, we will maximize our impact by working together. Poland has its own programs that it does. The United States has its programs that it does. And working together and cooperatively, we can get the most zing for the zloty. In the meeting in Washington, Minister Sikorski invited Secretary of State Clinton to attend the Eastern Partnership Initiative Summit to take place in Warsaw later this year, and we expect that we will participate in that meeting at a very senior level. We've also been working together on Belarus, Poland and the United States, and Poland and the United States in Europe. And as you know, at the end of January, we, together with the EU, the United States and the EU, announced a targeted set of sanctions. And we sent a very, very clear message to the government of Belarus, as well as Mr. Lukashenko, to say that business as usual will not continue as long as the suppression of civil society, opposition to independent media, and continues, and demonstrators are detained. In our view, by the way, these demonstrators are effectively political prisoners, and we call on the government of Belarus to release them now. And we are very appreciative of Poland's leadership on Belarus and the very successful donors conference, which was in Warsaw earlier, in early February, which raised 87 million euros, and the United States was able to also increase its contributions by a third to activists and civil society voices in Belarus. I mentioned democracy as the first pillar of our relationship. A second pillar is promoting prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic, and in particular, let me focus this afternoon on energy security, which is a priority of the Obama administration and also a priority for Poland, I'm pleased to say. And last week, Poland and the United States signed an agreement to expand energy cooperation on clean energy and renewable sources of energy. And Poland is also a member of something called the Global Shale Gas Initiative, an initiative by the United States, an international initiative with several other countries where there is the prospect of finding shale gas. And we also signed with Poland an agreement on civil nuclear cooperation. Secretary Clinton puts a very, very high priority on promoting energy diversity in Europe, which we believe is essential for ensuring security of supplies, competitive prices, and political independence. And as Secretary Clinton said last week, we believe that these initiatives will expand opportunities for both our countries. It will reduce Poland's and Europe's dependence on any one source of energy. Let me just talk briefly about security as well. Obviously, security is fundamental to both of us, and we both contribute to one another's security. We made a lot of progress last year in Lisbon, at the Lisbon Summit. Lisbon was a watershed in the alliance's evolution, and we achieved a lot of progress. First, we revitalized the alliance and prepared it to meet the new threats of the 21st century. We did it by adopting a new strategic concept, which, by the way, is short and readable. And we also applied some structural reforms to make NATO more effective and less bureaucratic. And of course, we reaffirmed our unwavering commitment to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, a commitment to NATO and to Poland and to all NATO allies. We also agreed on a common approach in Afghanistan and agreed to pursue a strategy that will allow Afghans to gradually take lead responsibility for their security in their country, while continuing a strong partnership with NATO. And of course, we, the United States, greatly honors Poland's sacrifices and appreciate the steadfastness and thank Poland for the very strong contributions it is making to the fight against extremism in Afghanistan. And in Lisbon, we also addressed the issue of missile defense. We realize that you cannot any longer guarantee security with just tanks and bombers. We now need to protect ourselves against a new and serious set of threats, in particular ballistic missiles in the hands of dangerous regimes, and especially if they're combined with nuclear weapons. And our aim is to develop a missile defense capability that will provide protection for all of the NATO territory. We think that this approach to missile defense is good for the United States, good for NATO, and good as well for Poland. And last week Secretary Clinton underlined our commitment to move forward and ahead with building missile defenses here. Let me just conclude with a note about Russia. We also made progress in Lisbon on the NATO-Russia relationship. We agreed that NATO and Russia would undertake a joint review of 21st century common dangers, which include terrorism, piracy, natural and man-made disasters, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and ballistic missiles. And we met in the NATO-Russia Council, in fact, for the first time since 2008. And let me say that we believe that cooperation with Russia can advance and enhance stability throughout Europe and Eurasia. But when we engage in cooperation with Russia, we are very, very clear that this cooperation will in no way limit the United States or NATO's capacity to deploy missile defense or other collective defense capabilities. And none of the progress we make with Russia comes at the expense of our principles. And those principles include a commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations in Europe and NATO's open door policy. All of NATO has its differences with Russia, and we will continue to have its differences with Russia, even as we try to find ways in which we can cooperate. So to sum up, let me say Poland and America are united in more than a strong Europe, and we believe that good things happen when we cooperate. And our two countries play a unique and special role in forging transatlantic solidarity, and as well on the global challenges we face. I was talking with one of my colleagues about these remarks, and he said, and I agreed, that being ambassador to Poland is one of the best jobs in the world. And I genuinely feel that way and feel extremely lucky every day. Our countries face many challenges around the globe, but we're very, very fortunate to be able to face them together as true allies and friends. So thank you very much, and with that I look forward to taking your questions.
Dear Ambassador, thank you very much for your speech. Thank you for your readiness to share your view with us about Polish-US relations. It's really very good meeting. It can be very good meeting because Ambassador is practitioner, but also she was research fellow in the most important US think tanks. So please ask some questions. I open the discussion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. I'm a fifth-year student of international relations, and I would like to inquire about the situation in the Middle East and North Africa, and the role of the United States in this whole situation. What should the Obama administration and the West in general do about the violence of Gaddafi? Or what measures should be taken, and who should the West talk to, in fact? Should we give them money, or should we give them diplomatic support, or should we just leave them and do it their own way? What measures should be taken? What do you think?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it so well and forcefully. The first thing I think is that we need to make clear that, we need to do this with the United States and Europe together, and as much of the world as possible, that indiscriminate attacks against unarmed civilians seeking universally recognized fundamental rights are not accessible. And we need to be clear that the current regime has lost legitimacy, and as the President has said, it's time for Mr. Gaddafi to step aside. We need to be very, very clear about that, and we need to do it in a way that expresses as much international solidarity as possible, because any cleavages that we have between us will only hurt those who are seeking to improve life in Libya and help those who seek to perpetuate terms of specific next steps, there's been a Security Council resolution. There are talks with the African Union and as well the Arab League about what the next step should be. Those regional organizations, which obviously are directly impacted, they are working on developing their own common opinion. I think it's very, very important to work as closely with them as possible so that we are expressing not only an international, but in particular a regional concern and outrage about what's taking place, so that any efforts that we may decide to take down the road, whatever they may be, and there isn't a decision yet about what those might be, are not perceived or twisted to be seen as somehow illegitimate outside of defense. So right now we need to prepare for the range of options, and you all read the paper so you know what those range of options are. We need to try to act particularly in NATO and the transatlantic space, and as much as possible with the agreement of and following, frankly, the council of the principal actors in the region, the Arab League and the African Union and others. But I'll conclude by saying that we need to be on the right side of history. And it's very, very important that people remain very, very clear about how these actions against people seeking fundamentally accepted universal rights are not subjected to indiscriminate violence and are not penalized for expressing their voices.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm a first-year student of international relations. Sorry. I would like to ask you, what are the chances of success of the project proposed by Senator Kirk earlier this week regarding removing of visa requirements for Polish citizens?
That's a good question. So for those of you who don't know, Senator Mark Kirk and some House members as well put forward new legislation that would change the way the criteria for Poland's membership into the visa waiver program. One of the co-sponsors of the legislation, Congressman Lipinski, called Poland's exclusion from the visa waiver program obsolete. And I think what I would say is President Obama, when he met with President Komorowski, made clear that this is an issue that he would like to fix, probably would like to fix by the end of his term. I think it's very, very encouraging that there's new legislation. I think it's not the only new legislation. Last July, Senator Polsce from Maryland also introduced legislation. So I think that there is greater awareness in the United States that this is a problem and that this is an irritant. And if I can put it this way, there's nobody in this room who would like to see this happen more than I would have. But in the meantime, I will say, as some of my Polish government counterparts have said recently, that in the meantime, over 90% of Poles who apply for visas get them, and they're 10-year multiple entry visas. So as we try to fix this problem, in the meantime, the overwhelming number of people who apply for visas get them, and they're usable and reusable over the course of 10 years.
Practically every president of the United States had his own doctrine in the foreign policy, as, for example, the Carter Doctrine and Reagan Doctrine, and of course Bush Doctrine. The question is, how would you define in a few words the main principles of the Obama Doctrine?
I'm not sure that there's a doctrine yet, and whichever journalist comes up with the doctrine first, a clever name for a doctrine will win a prize, or at least an appearance on television. I would say two things about President Obama's foreign policy. He's a very principled person, and he's a person very focused on results. And so his principles are that we don't see a big gap between our values and our interests. And our foreign policy works best when our values and interests are seen through that prism. The second thing I'd say is he believes that the challenges we are facing now require more international cooperation than at any time. No country, not even the United States, can solve problems that we face on its own. And so it's very, very important that we work together. A frequent question I'll get in a setting like this is, it looks like the United States is paying more attention to China or India or Brazil, and that Europe is less important. And my answer to that is Europe and China and India and Brazil are more important. They relatively have more wealth and more power than they had before, and we all need to be paying more attention to them. But for that very reason, cooperation with Europe, transatlantic cooperation, transatlantic solidarity is more important than ever, because in order to face the challenges we are going to face from around the world, we need to work as much as possible as one.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. I'm also from the Institute of International Relations. I'd like to ask about economic relations between the United States and Poland. A number of American companies are looking for shale gas in Poland. In your opinion, is high-volume extraction an option, and if yes, when?
I'm not a geologist, so I can't answer that question, but I'll say a little bit about shale gas more generally. First, that there are American companies, there are Polish companies, and there are other international companies that have concessions, opposition. Nobody seems to be able to do that, and I'm not sure that it's doable. And the very same question was asked in the United States in 1989 and 1991 about this part of the world. How come nobody could see this happening? You here, we probably could see it happening, but it's, nobody can predict exactly what is going to be the single event. I think what people can say is that over time, the trend is in one direction, which is a positive one. But exactly how long and what happens between now and then is very hard to predict.
Well, speaking about South America, because this topic is usually neglected by when we are speaking about the foreign policy of Obama, what do you think about the gaining powers in South America, for example, Brazil, that is more and more independent from the United States and shows its power all the time? And what is Obama's attitude or Obama's plan for this? And what is he planning to do with this?
Well, first of all, it's good to see countries expressing their, particularly democratic ones, playing a bigger role in the international arena. This is not something to discourage, this is something to welcome. The more countries that step up and accept their responsibilities as global players, the better. And the issue is, how do you adapt international institutions to give them a voice, but also to keep the international system, or make the international system work better, despite the fact that the number of voices grows. So one thing that President Obama has done is sort of very quietly nudge the G8 into the G20, which, yes, I know does not include Poland, but does include countries like Brazil, which were not included. And it's very important that their voices are heard, because they do have a bigger say, and by giving them more of a stake in the international system, one hopes that they would also act more responsibly, I should say. And so this is a reality, and there's no turning that clock back. The issue is, how do you find a way for the these governments who want a greater role in the international system to play that role? And then how do you create new mechanisms, new tools, so that playing this role can be constructive rather than blocking the coming of the international system? And has President Obama, has he gone, or is he about to go to South America? He's about to go.
Secretary Clinton was there already. Found out that, for example, the new president of Brazil is more independent than the previous one.
This is the world in which we live, and this is the world which we have wanted. I mean, we want countries to grow, we want countries to become more prosperous, and we want countries to show more leadership. That also means that we're not necessarily going to agree on everything. But the larger the stake in the international system that democracies have, it seems to me, over time, the more they may have in common as they move forward to address common challenges.
Good afternoon, Adriana Łukasiewicz, Institute of International Relations. I have one question regarding Saudi Arabia. On Friday, there are expected some demonstrations in Saudi Arabia in different cities of Saudi Arabia. I have a question: does administration of Barack Obama has any plan regarding Saudi Arabia, how to react in a case when the country like so important like Saudi Arabia for the whole world destabilizes?
Right. Well, of course, I'm in Warsaw, not Washington, so I can't really authoritatively answer your question about what the policy is. But in general terms, we are working with governments in the region and encouraging them to take steps to be responsive and preferably ahead of time to expressions in governments about what and in societies about what people's concerns are. And in some ways, to a certain extent, some of the undemocratic regimes in the Middle East have nonetheless been more responsive to the aspirations of their citizens. But this is, over the long run, it's going to be important to find ways, stable ways over a period of time to provide and meet the demands that people in the region have, and in particular places like Saudi Arabia, which is so important.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Well, I would like to ask, does the United States consider European Union as a valuable global partner? And what is your personal view? Does the Lisbon Treaty has changed something in European common policy? And what is the administration of the United States view about the ambition of Europe to create their own military forces independent from NATO?
Those are good questions. So, personal views, I'm no longer entitled to personal views. So I'll speak as analytically as I can. The Obama administration's policy towards the European Union is very clear, and it is that we want a strong European Union. And for a lot of the reasons I've been saying, the kinds of problems we face require cooperation. They're beyond the ability of any single country to address alone. And so we don't see a strong European Union as something to be concerned about. The concern we have is that the European Union might not be strong enough. And so we seek to foster and support those in the European Union. Poland is certainly one of those countries who seek a strong European Union. And we see this as fundamental to a strong transatlantic relationship. With respect to a greater EU role in contributing to international security, that's also something that we welcome. We want the EU to participate. We want EU countries to be active. What we don't want is duplication of things that we're already doing reasonably well, like in NATO. And we especially don't want that at a time when most governments are cutting their military budgets, at a time when the security challenges are growing, not shrinking. So, you know, it would be very much encouraged to see the EU play a role in places where, let's say, NATO is not particularly able at the moment to play a role. And we'd like to see that, and we're encouraging that. But what we strongly want to avoid is duplicating, you know, functions, systems, things that are already in place in NATO, particularly at a time when all of our resources are shaken.
Mr. Ambassador, my name is Alexandra Dubkovska, and I'm a recent graduate from City College CUNY. And my question is about Belarus and the following steps for democratization. What should they be? And also, what is the Poland's, in particular, role in this process?
Well, it's nice to meet a fellow alum. And so, you know, the Belarus situation is really complicated, and you have to be very clear-headed about what you can do and what's to be expected. But I think we've taken some good steps. So in January, the United States announced some sanctions that were targeted on Lukashenko and those immediately around him, as well as on some enterprises, like businesses, that are very closely connected to Lukashenko, and which we found to be problematic in the past. And the EU also took some steps to punish Lukashenko for the post-December 19th crackdown. And I think these need to continue, and Lukashenko needs to know that that he's not going to get what he wants if he continues on this path. Second thing we need to do is to try to help people of Belarus, and that's why what the government of Poland did in early February is so important, which was to convene this donors conference to focus on sort of the other side of the ledger, which is not only punishing, but also making sure that we provide additional support to the people of Belarus. And you know, I was very gratified to see so much willingness in Europe and in the United States to rise to the challenge. And you know, the kinds of things that we need to do are, you know, some broadcasting, so there's a source of free information in Belarus, helping civil society in a variety of ways, people who are active and supportive of democracy. And then I guess third, that we remain very steadfast and very clear. You know, we need to continue to show Lukashenko that it is not acceptable to declare victory in an election that was rigged and then followed up by rounding up political opponents and in some cases beating them up and then putting them either under house arrest or jailing them. So he needs to know that whatever he may be promising, that's not going to be enough until he reverses his actions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. In your speech, you told a lot about the role of America to promote the democracy in the world. And now we hear from the media about the arresting of the soldier who stole the secret information to WikiLeaks. And my question is, what is more important, what do you personally regard, what's more important to international order? Is it the freedom, is it the right to information or state security?
That's a great question. And I would say is, and I understand the question, I think. I don't think it's a crazy question. I think it's a good question. And what I would say is that in claiming to be advancing the principles of free speech, what happened in this case was that the principles of free speech have been undermined. Because one thing that's really important is candor in diplomacy, honesty in diplomacy. So without it, you can't really be analytical. You can't figure out what's happening in your job and on the issues that you care about and do your business. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of this is, that there's a threat now to being able to speak openly and honestly. I don't actually think at the end of the day that will happen. I guess that's my answer to your question. I guess I can say this personally. I'm a First Amendment absolutist in my own country. I believe that people should have the right to say what it is they want to say, even if it's odious speech. But I also believe that you need information to be able to do your jobs in diplomacy, to promote democracy in the places where we're all concerned about promoting democracy, to build a safer and more just world, and in a climate in which candid discussions that people have behind closed doors get exposed. It's harder to do that.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm an international student, and I have a question regarding the situation in Iraq and the differences between the Kurds and Sunni and Shia. So I don't know how the United States is going to ask for what's the position of the United States in case the situation, the differences do not get solved between them both. So does the United States accept the emergence of a Kurdish state, or what's the plan of the United States in that case? Thank you.
I needed a gigantic briefing. It's a very, very good question. And look, I think things in Iraq are much better than many people would have predicted they would have turned out. But there are still some serious problems, including in terms of the coalition government and its ability to find a way to move forward and get down to the business of governing. The United States is very focused on this, but wants to do it in the context of present circumstances in Iraq, and according to the Constitution that's been adopted in Iraq. The United States is going forward with a transition in Iraq from an operation in which American and coalition military forces have been deeply involved to now a non-combat role and soon a civilian lead. And I think the most important thing is that the world doesn't forget about Iraq, even as other things bubble up, and that commitments to improving Iraq remain. And in that respect, the United States is committed to remaining involved in Iraq, and principally now in a civilian effort to provide good governance and support for civil society in Iraq. In fact, my agency, the State Department's budget for Iraq is growing by a substantial amount in the next fiscal year, even at a time when the numbers of U.S. military forces will shrink. One more question? We can gather up a couple if you want, and then I can try to answer them all at once.
Mr. Ambassador, I would like to ask you about the policy, the U.S. policy toward Mexicans and maybe other Latin people that are trying to pass the border illegally to search for a better life. Could you tell us something about this?
Have any more questions? So let me use my position. Because you mentioned in your speech about the role of cooperation with Russia in the sphere of security. I want to ask if you believe in secure Europe without democratic Russia. It's American perspective.
Secure Europe without democratic Russia. Okay, well, two good questions. The question of immigration to the United States is a hugely controversial one in my country. There's the largest immigrant group in the United States, coming to the United States now, is from Mexico. At a time of the United States economy is growing and doing much better, but there's still unemployment and at levels that are concerning to people, and somehow that gets expressed in concerns about immigrants. And so, President Obama has supported efforts to do comprehensive immigration reform, which would address in some fair, equitable, but also safe way the issue of immigration into the United States from Mexico and from elsewhere. And there are some similarities in terms of the United States and Poland, and one is that we have very intense political rivalries in the United States and strong differences of opinion on certain issues between the parties, and in particular on immigration issues. And so, making progress on this is really important, and it's a priority, but it's something that, with divided governments, we have is going to be difficult. It's something that President Bush also tried to do when he was president and was unable to do. So that's my non-answer on that question. On the issue of Russia, we want to pursue with Russia a policy that's very practical, where we can find areas of agreement that enhances our security and the security of all of our allies. And I think we've made some progress in doing that. The Russians themselves will have some decisions to make about the direction they are going to take. And obviously we see sort of different points of view, seemingly, between in the Russian leadership. And it seems to me that to sort of validate your question, the greatest security for all of us as NATO allies and as transatlantic partners with respect to the Eastern neighborhood is for the Eastern neighborhood, including Russia, to move in a more democratic direction. And that's the best kind of security guarantee we could have. And the only thing I would say in that respect is that demographic factors and structural factors are pushing Russia in a direction in which it should and ought to see its future lying with the West and with Europe, and not the other way around. But ultimately, it's going to be something for Russians to decide.
Are there any questions? So please.
Okay, last question.
2 years after the famous Cairo speech delivered by President Obama, and with almost non-significant progress in the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, but with a wave of revolutions and social unrests in North Africa and the Middle East, did the U-turn of American foreign policy on the Middle East achieve its results, or did it lead to completely unpredicted results?
I'm not sure I get the linkage that you're. I'm not sure I understand the linkage that you're suggesting, but President Obama very much remains committed to working on the peace process in the Middle East. He supports people who I know personally who are people of huge integrity and limitless energy, and there hasn't been as much progress as anybody would like. But he remains committed to addressing the problem, first and foremost for the people of the region, but also for broader security. I think Secretary Clinton and President Obama, in dealing with these, with the events in North Africa and in the Middle East, are doing a good job in expressing clear that our aspirations, the American aspirations as well as the aspirations of all of us in the transatlantic space, are with people who are seeking fundamental rights which are really under question in the international system. And this is going to obviously be difficult. Exactly how it unfolds is going to be hard to predict, and to a certain extent beyond anybody's individual ability to control. But I think it's very important, and the President, I think, has made it very clear that it's important that we're on the right side of history, and I think so far we've been on the right side.
So, Ambassador, thank you for the last one.